Rain streaked down the skin of the spire like 1,000 silver threads, tracing grooves in the steel and spilling into the alleys below. Rain's spire never slept. Its heartbeat pulsed in the distant rumble of cargo lifts and the buzz of neon. Signs fighting against the night. Crowds flowed endlessly along the narrow walkways, heads bent, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed forward. No one looked at the figure huddled in the shadow of a plastered wall. Nari pulled her knees tight to her chest, every motion an effort against the shivers running through her body. A gown she had once worn for ceremony clung to her in tatters, fabric frayed and stained by weeks of rain. Around her waist the sash still hung, blotched green where water had soaked it through, yet she refused to discard it. It was the last thread tying her to who she had been, a wife, a woman with a name and a place. Without it, she feared she would vanish entirely. Hunger gnawed at her more than the cold. Days without food had left her stomach cramping and her thoughts scattered. Pride kept her spine straight, even as her body wanted to curl into surrender. She had learned that once you slunked, the city forgot you existed, and she had already been invisible for too long. People glanced her way, their gazes flicking off the faint glow of her hair, the amber hue of her eyes. Recognition sparked, then rejection. They turned their faces away. She was not worth a second glance. Her breath came shallow, damp air chilling her lungs. She hated herself for wanting help, hated the desperate whisper in her chest that prayed for someone, anyone. To stop, it was easier when no one looked. Easier to sink into the shadows and pretend her world had already ended. Then a pair of small boots stopped in front of her. Nari blinked through the curtain of her wet hair. A child stood there, human, no more than 7 years old. The girl's oversized coat dragged close to the ground, sleeves rolled in clumsy cuffs. Rain had reddened her cheeks, but her eyes shone steady and clear. In her hands she held a cracked lunchbox. She set it down with both palms, the action deliberate as if placing an offering at a shrine. "Are you hungry?" the girl asked. Her voice wasn't pitying. It carried no edge of mockery. It was simply practical, as if she were pointing out something obvious. Nari's throat tightened. Suspicion rose first. Nothing was free in Rain's spire. But when the girl opened the box, all that suspicion cracked beneath the sight of a crust of bread and a folded square of cheese. Thin fingers, still childlike, but reddened from the cold, offered the food without hesitation. Nari reached slowly, trembling from more than hunger. Each bite she took was careful, measured, afraid her stomach might revolt if she rushed. The bread was plain, the cheese sharp, but to her it tasted like life, like proof she hadn't disappeared completely. The girl's lips curved in the faintest smile. "My name's Dana," Nari swallowed, her throat dry. She tried to speak, but no words came. Dina leaned closer, lowering her voice with the solemnity of someone carrying a secret older than her years. "Marry my dad. He'll give you warm meals." The words struck like a blade, slipped between ribs. Nari should have laughed, or recoiled, or refused outright. Instead she froze, stunned by the audacity and the innocence. Shame burned hot in her chest, tangled with something more dangerous, longing. A thought of a roof, of being wanted, of not being alone for even one night terrifying in its power dot. Before Nari could answer, Dina stood, brushing rain from her coat. She held out her small hand with a firmness that brooked no delay. "Come on, he won't yell. He's good." Nari's heart pounded. Trusting strangers had cost her everything before. Staying meant risking betrayal. Leaving meant hunger, and maybe death by morning. Her mind spun through every wound and loss, every time she had been discarded as less than nothing. But the child's hand remained steady, waiting. Nari drew a long, shaking breath. "If she can choose to trust me, maybe I can choose once more." Her fingers closed around Dina's small hand. The warmth of it shocked her. Together, they stepped toward the lift bay, steam rising from broken pipes, the doors groaning open like a warning. As the lift carried them upward, Nari leaned against the wall, her legs weak, the child's trust anchoring her. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she let herself step toward the unknown. The lift rattled as it rose, a hollow cage of metal smelling of rust and damp polish. Nari leaned into the wall, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Dina swayed beside her, unbothered, humming under her breath, as if the creaking of old gears was a familiar song. Nari studied the girl, in profile the two thin cheeks, the steady way she held herself, the spark of stubbornness in her eyes. Survival had already etched its marks into her. When the doors finally scraped open, the corridor beyond smelled of damp concrete and stale cooking oil. Peeling numbers were painted beside crooked door frames. A single plant, neglected and drooping, sat in a cracked pot outside one unit. Dina tugged Nari's hand and marched with purpose to a door with a dented plate. She knocked twice, quick, and sure, the door opened almost immediately. A man filled the frame, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, cropped short with threads of gray at the temples. His clothes were simple: dark trousers, a rolled work shirt, boots still wet from the rain. His posture was precise, too precise for an ordinary clerk. He scanned Nari in one measured sweep, her shredded gown, the ruined sash tied around her waist, her balance barely held together. No disgust, no pity, just an assessment honed by habit. "Dina," he said, his voice low, controlled. The girl's hand squeezed Nari's, pulling her forward. "She's hungry," she announced. Then, with the bluntness of a child, "She should stay?" Nari froze. Heat rose to her face, shame mixing with the bitter edge of fear. She expected a narrowing of the eyes, a closing of the door, a demand for payment. The man did none of those things. His gaze lingered a moment longer, then shifted toward the narrow apartment behind him. "I'm Lel," he said finally. His voice carried the weight of command without needing to be loud. He stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in." The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a galley kitchen, the furniture worn but orderly. A heater ticked near the window, drying socks strung on a rack. The faint smell of tea clung to the air, mixed with the metallic tang of rain. Dina hung her oversized coat with practiced ease and pointed toward a chair. Nari hesitated, rooted. To the floor. Every instinct screamed caution. But Lel moved to the counter, ladled something steaming from a pot, and set a bowl on the table. Thick soup, pale broth studded with root vegetables. He pushed it toward her without ceremony. "Eat," he said, her stomach twisted with longing. Still, she sat stiffly, hands trembling as she wrapped them around the warm bowl. She braced for questions, for demands, for the price that always came. None arrived. She ate slowly, bite by bite, the heat spreading through her chest until her eyes stung with the effort not to cry. Dina climbed into the other chair, legs swinging. As she kicked the wood, "See? I told you," she said brightly, as if this had been inevitable. Nari lowered her spoon, voice rough from disuse. "I can work, clean, cook. I don't take charity." Lel met her eyes, steady as stone. "Then don't call it that. Call it a start." The simple words cut through her defenses more deeply than kindness ever could. She felt herself shaking, not from cold this time, but from the terrifying thought that perhaps this wasn't a trap, that perhaps she had been offered not pity, but a place. Dina slid her empty cup across the table toward her. "We've got extra blankets," she said matter-of-factly. "And Dad doesn't snore much." Nari blinked hard, struggling to hold the line she had clung to for so long. Lel was already placing a pillow and blanket on the couch, smoothing the fabric once with a precise palm. He checked the window latch, dimmed the light, and paused briefly at his daughter's door before retreating to his own room. "You're safe here," he said simply, and closed the door behind him. Nari sat on the couch, the blanket heavy in her hands. She had promised herself never to trust again, never to open the door to hope. But with warmth in her stomach, a child's laughter still echoing, and a man's quiet discipline filling the space, she felt something dangerous stir. For the first time since she had lost everything, she believed she might survive another night. The heater ticked softly, steady. As a heartbeat, Nari woke with a start, uncertain of where she was. For a breathless moment she expected rain on her skin, the shove of strangers stepping over her body in some forgotten alley. But no rain touched her here. The blanket was warm, the couch beneath. Her reel, the silence intact except for the faint rattle of pipes. She sat up slowly, the borrowed thermal shirt loose on her frame, the sash tied stubbornly at her waist like armor against disappearance. From the kitchen came the scent of tea. Steam curled from a kettle while Lowell sat at the table, his posture exact, as if the chair were a post he was assigned to guard. Dina perched beside him, elbows on the scarred wood, chin resting on her hands as she watched the water heat. She brightened when she noticed Nari, waving her over as if she had been expected all along. "Sit," Lel said, not unkindly, sliding a chipped cup across the table. His voice carried that same disciplined calm that unsettled Nari more than anger would have. She lowered herself cautiously into the chair, curling her fingers around the warm porcelain. The heat bled into her numb skin, reminding her just how cold she had been for too long. Dina broke the silence first. "Do you have a family?" she asked, eyes wide with curiosity, unsoftened by pity. Nari's chest tightened. Images pressed at the edges of her memory, her husband's face already fading under the blur of hunger. And grief, the ceremony where her gown had meant respect instead of ruin. "I did," she said softly. Her voice cracked. "Not any more." The girl tilted her head, then glanced at her father. "We don't either. Just me and him," she said. It like fact, not complaint. Lel reached for the kettle, refilled Dina's cup, and let his gaze linger on Nari longer than it needed to. She shifted in her chair, uneasy beneath that steady assessment. Most men she had known in the city would have demanded her story by now, demanded her body in trade, or turned her away outright. This man simply accepted her presence, offering tea as if it cost nothing. It unsettled her because she wanted to believe it. She tested him with a question, her voice low and raw. "Why did you let me stay?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because Dina asked. And because you looked like you wouldn't last another night outside." No flattery, no suspicion. Just plain truth. The honesty cut deeper than kindness. Nari lowered her eyes, fighting the swell of something she had nearly forgotten hope. The day passed with fragile rhythm. Lel left for the docks after checking the heater's dial, latching the door with soldier's precision. Before leaving, he looked at Nari once more. "You can stay. No one here will bother you." He spoke it like fact, not promise. Then he was gone. Nari stood awkward in the small space, uncertain what role she was meant to play. But Dina solved. That by dragging a stool to the sink. "If you wash, I'll dry." Together they worked clumsy but determined, water dripping from their sleeves, the girl's laughter bubbling out when she splashed too hard. Nari found herself laughing too, the sound foreign in her own throat. Later, Dina brought a cracked hand mirror, setting it on the table. "You can brush here. My mom used to braid mine. I can't do it right anymore." The words landed heavy, but Nari picked up the brush. She drew it slowly through her damp hair, red strands falling straight, while the faint green streaks shimmered. Faintly in the afternoon light, Dina leaned closer, touching a strand gently. Does it glow more at night? Nari hesitated, then nodded. A little. Only when I'm warm. It's beautiful, Dina said simply, the honesty in her voice. Shattered defenses that cruelty never could. Evening came, neon bleeding through the blinds. When Lel returned, his shoulders damp from rain, he scanned the room with quiet efficiency. His eyes found Dina, then moved to Nari. She had taken it upon herself to cook vegetables chopped fine, broth simmering thin but fragrant. It smells. Good, he said, setting his bag down. Nari looked at the floor. I hope it's enough. It is. His voice left no space for doubt. They ate together, 3 at a scarred table, soup steaming in chipped bowls. Dina slurped noisily. Lel allowed the corner of his mouth to lift at her antics, and Nari felt something warm bloom in her chest. For the first time in a long time, the rhythm of a home brushed against her skin. When Dina drifted to sleep later, drawings scattered around her, Nari stood at the window. Rain misted against the glass, neon streaks glowing faint across her. Reflection. She heard Lel step beside her, felt the steadiness of his presence without looking. You didn't have to cook, he said quietly. I wanted to, she answered. His voice stayed calm. Then it's not charity. The silence that followed was different now, less heavy, more like a thread tying them together. Nari breathed in the quiet, and for the first time since she lost everything, believed she might belong. The rain did not ease that night. It hammered against the glass in steady sheets, a reminder of the city's indifference. Nari lay awake on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her body warm beneath the blanket. Lel had left, but her mind restless. Comfort had always been a trap before. Shelter was never free. Food always came with a cost. Every kindness tonight pressed against her like a weight, until she could hardly breathe beneath it. She rose before dawn, moving quietly so as not to wake them. Her fingers lingered on the thermal shirt Lel had given her, too large across the shoulders, sleeves brushing her wrists. She pulled it off, folded it with care, and placed it on the table. Beside it, she laid her ruined sash. Without it, she felt naked, but to leave it behind would be to admit she belonged here, and she wasn't ready for that kind of hope. A scrap of paper sat on the counter. She found a stub of pencil and wrote the only words she trusted herself to. Thank you. I can't take more. Each letter shook under her hand, cutting deeper than she expected. She placed the note atop the folded clothes, adjusted it until it was square, then turned toward the door. The latch clicked softly, a sound far too loud in the silence. She had almost slipped through when a small voice broke the stillness. Are you leaving? Nari froze. Dina stood barefoot in the hallway, hair mussed from sleep, her oversized shirt dragging almost to her knees. Her eyes, wide and wet, locked on Nari with something more piercing than accusation fear. Nari swallowed hard. I thought I should, she whispered. Her voice cracked. Before I take too much. The girl's face crumpled. She darted forward and wrapped thin arms around Nari's waist, holding with a strength that shocked her. You don't steal from us, Dina said fiercely, her words muffled against the fabric. You make the apartment bright. Nari's throat closed. She placed a trembling hand on the child's head, brushing damp strands back, her chest aching with a pain that felt like hope clawing through scars. The door to the back room opened. Lel stepped out, already dressed for work, his boots laced, his shirt rolled at the sleeves. His eyes swept the room once, taking everything in, the folded clothes on the table, the note, his daughter clinging to Nari. His face did not harden. Instead it stilled, as if some decision he had made long ago was simply being spoken aloud. Now, "You belong here," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of command that brooked no argument. Nari shook her head, tears threatening. "I don't. I came with nothing." "I can't. You're not here because of what you lost," he interrupted, firm but not harsh. His gaze fixed on her, steady as steel. "You're here because I want you here, because Dina needs you here, because you already make this place more than it was." Her chest heaved, words trapped in her throat. She searched his face for hesitation, for the hidden motive she was certain must exist. There was none. Only the calm certainty of a man who had made his choice. "You're not my charity," Lel continued, stepping closer, his presence filling the space between them. "You're my choice." The words struck deeper than any kindness she had ever been offered. Dina's arms tightened around her waist, and Nari felt her knees weaken. She wanted to run. Every instinct born of survival screamed at her to, but she couldn't. She wanted what he offered too badly. Slowly trembling, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Lel exhaled through his nose, a faint release of tension. He moved to her side and placed a steady hand against her arm. Not forceful, not tentative, simply present, grounding her. Nari let herself lean into that strength, the sash still trembling in her hand. Dana tipped her face up, eyes shining. "Does that mean she's staying forever?" Lel's mouth lifted in the faintest smile. "It means she's not going anywhere." Nari drew the child into her arms, holding her close as if afraid she might dissolve. For once, she did not feel like an intruder clinging to scraps. She felt wanted. Behind her, Lel picked up the folded sash from the table and pressed it back into her hands. "Keep it," he said simply. "It's part of you. And everything that's part of you stays here now." Her chest tightened, relief and disbelief twisting together. For the first time since her husband's death, the world didn't feel like it was closing in. It felt like it was opening. Rain streaked down the window, but inside, warmth settled. Into the small apartment. The note she had written lay crumpled in Lel's fist, folded out of sight, never mentioned again. The sash, once a relic of loss, now hung across the back of her chair. Not abandoned. Not a memory. A piece of her life that was no longer hers alone. Evening fell with a hush across the spire. Rain soft against the glass, neon bleeding in fractured colors. The apartment smelled of simmering broth and fried bread. Dina had insisted on setting. The table herself, stacking the chipped bowls with serious concentration. Nari stood at the counter, knife steady in her hand as she sliced vegetables. Lel had returned from the docks not long before, damp from the drizzle, his posture heavy with fatigue. Yet as he entered, his eyes lingered on the small details. Dina humming to herself, Nari moving with quiet efficiency in the kitchen. He set his bag down and rolled his sleeves with precise movements. "Need help?" he asked. Nari's first instinct was to refuse. Independence was the only defense she had ever trusted. But the warmth of the stove, the laughter spilling from Dina's lips, and the steadiness in Lel's gaze made her answer. Softer than she expected. "You can slice the bread." They worked side by side, their shoulders brushing now and then in the cramped space. Each accidental touch carried a charge Nari tried not to notice. She focused on the vegetables, but her hands shook slightly when Lel reached past her for a pan, his presence close, his scent faintly of metal and rain. He never pressed the closeness. His restraint was its own kind of danger, the kind that made her want to trust. At dinner, Dina slurped noisily, declaring the soup too thin but tasty. Lel allowed a ghost of a smile, the lines at the corner of his mouth softening. Nari felt something bloom in her chest at the sight. She ate carefully, every bite, reminding her that this table was not one she had been forced to sit at, but one she had been invited to dot after the meal, when Dinah curled up with her drawings. Nari and Lel cleaned in silence. At the sink, her fingers brushed his as she handed him a dripping plate. This time neither pulled back. His rough, calloused skin lingered against hers for a beat longer than necessary. She swallowed, heart pounding, afraid to look at him. He dried the plate slowly, methodical as always, but the corner of his jaw tightened, betraying the restraint he carried like armor. Later, when Dina had drifted to sleep, the apartment shrank to quiet. Nari stood at the window, rain misting the glass, her faintly glowing hair reflected against the city's blur. She sensed Lel's presence before he spoke. He stepped to her side, his posture exact, but his gaze softer than she had yet seen. You didn't have to cook," he said. "I wanted to," she answered. Her voice was steady, but her chest tightened with the weight of the truth. She wanted to do more than survive here. She wanted to belong. He studied her profile, his eyes catching the faint glow in her hair. "Then it isn't charity." The silence that followed was charged. Not heavy, not empty, but alive. Nari's pulse raced. She wanted to say something sharp, something to distance herself, but nothing came. Instead, she let the quiet stretch between them until his hand lifted. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to step away. His fingers brushed a strand of her hair back from her face, lingering against her cheek. Her breath caught. Fear and longing tangled inside her chest. She didn't move away. "You don't have to prove anything here," Lel said quietly. "Not to me, not to her." The words broke something in her, deeper than any touch could. She turned her face. Slightly, enough to breathe, enough to steady herself, but she didn't step back. "Then why does it feel like I do?" She whispered. His hand lingered another heartbeat before withdrawing. "Because you're not used to being safe." Their eyes met, steady against steady, amber against dark. For the first time, Nari didn't look away. The restraint in him was terrifying and reassuring all at once. A soldier's discipline turned into shelter instead of threat. When her hand brushed against his at the window ledge, he didn't flinch. He didn't close the distance either. He simply stayed. And in that space between them, fragile but undeniable, something shifted. Nari realized she wasn't surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. The heater clicked in the corner, steady, as a clock marking the rhythm of their new life. Morning light seeped through the blinds in thin gray bars, softened by the lingering mist outside. Nari folded the blanket she had slept under, smoothing it with deliberate care, no longer treating it as borrowed, but as something entrusted to her. The sash lay draped over the back of her chair now, not hidden away. Each time she passed it, her fingers brushed the fabric, claiming it as part of herself again. Dina bounded into the room, hair tangled from sleep, her small face bright despite the gloom outside. She scrambled into Nari's lap without hesitation, carrying a piece of toast she'd clearly stolen before it was finished. Crumbs scattered across Nari's borrowed shirt, and the girl grinned up at her, as if daring her to scold. "You're messy," Nari said, her tone sharper than she intended. But Dina only laughed and leaned harder into her. The sound softened. Something deep inside her. She rested a cautious hand on the child's back, surprised at how natural the gesture felt. At the stove, Lel glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Eat at the table," he said, calm as ever. Dina obeyed, slipping off Nari's lap and plopping onto the chair beside her instead. She bit into the toast noisily, swinging her legs beneath the table. The moment hung between them like a fragile thread. Nari reached for her cup, keeping her eyes low. Yet she felt Lel's gaze linger, steady and considering, as though he'd just witnessed something significant. The day carried its rhythm chores, small errands, Dina's chatter filling the gaps. Nari found herself helping with laundry, brushing out the child's hair, and stitching a tear in one of her coats. She told herself it was repayment, a way to ease her guilt. But when Dina tugged her hand, dragging her to the market stalls, with laughter, Nari realized she was no longer moving like a guest. She was moving like part of them. Evening fell. They ate together again, the three of them at the scarred table. Soup simmered in chipped bowls, steam curling in the lamplight. Dina leaned against Nari's side, her head heavy with fatigue, her voice slipping soft as her eyelids drooped. "Mom," she murmured, half dreaming, "can we go to the deck tomorrow? Watch the sky?" The word landed like a blade and a bomb at once. Nari froze, her chest locking. For an instant, instinct told her to correct the child, to push away before she claimed a place she had no right to. Her eyes flicked to Lel. He did not flinch. He did not correct. His gaze met hers, steady and calm, carrying no surprise. Only quiet acceptance. Nari's throat burned. Slowly, she bent her head and pressed her lips to Dina's hair. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking on the single word. "We'll go tomorrow." The girl's breathing deepened, sleep claiming her fully. Lel rose, lifting Dina gently in his arms, and carried her to her room. Nari followed, standing in the doorway as he tucked the blanket around her. He lingered there a moment, one hand smoothing the child's hair, then turned to Nari. Their eyes met in the dim light. She expected hesitation, perhaps even discomfort. Instead, Lel's gaze held the same calm certainty it always did, but softer. Now, as though something inside him had eased. "She's been waiting to say that," he said quietly. Nari's hands trembled at her sides. "And you let her?" He gave a small nod. "Because it's true." The words left her unmoored. She wanted to argue, to remind him she was a widow, an outsider, a burden, but the argument died in her throat. For the first time, she wasn't treated as those things. She was treated as someone who belonged. The heater ticked, the city hummed beyond the walls, and Nari felt the fragile edges of her life begin to knit into something whole. The spire's night hummed steady, a chorus of engines and neon signs flickering like artificial stars. Rain had paused for once, leaving the windows streaked but clear. Inside the small apartment, warmth gathered from the heater's steady pulse and the faint aroma of broth still lingering in the air. Nari sat on the couch, her sash folded in, her lap, running her fingers over its frayed edges as though reacquainting herself with the woman she used to be. Lel sat across the room, boots untied, sleeves rolled, posture straight even in rest. He had the stillness of someone trained to hold watch through long hours. The silence between them was no longer brittle. It had grown dense, alive with things neither had said. "NAAR, I broke it first." Her voice came soft, but steady. "You move. Like a soldier. Every time you check the door latch, every way you scan a room. Why aren't you still in uniform?" For the first time since she met him, Lel's composure shifted. Not anger, not shame, just a pause, a faint tightening at the edges of his jaw. His eyes didn't waver from hers, though. "I left," he said simply. "Why?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Because I was ordered to clear a sector. They called it a sweep. I called it what it was: execution. Civilians, children, people caught between sides. I refused. And in refusing, I lost my command, my rank, my place." His gaze dropped briefly to his hands, scarred and calloused, resting flat against his knees. "But I kept my conscience. And I kept Dina." Nari's breath caught. The quiet authority she had felt from him since the moment he opened the door suddenly sharpened into clarity. He had chosen exile not because he was cast out, but because he would not bend. "You sacrificed everything," she murmured. I sacrificed nothing that mattered, Lel corrected, eyes lifting to meet hers again. This, he gestured faintly toward the closed door where his daughter slept, is what mattered. The rest was noise. Nari's throat tightened. She thought of her husband, lost in the tides of a war she couldn't even claim to understand. Any more, she thought of herself, clinging to a sash as if cloth alone could prove she had once been seen. And here was this man, stripped of everything, yet still holding himself with the discipline of someone unbroken. Her hands trembled over the sash. Why me? The question burst out, raw and unguarded. You don't even know my story. Why? Let me stay? Why give me this? Lel rose, crossing the small room with quiet steps. He crouched in front of her, resting his forearms on his knees, meeting her gaze at eye level. His expression was calm, but something softer glowed beneath the steel. Because you're here, he said simply. Because you stayed when you could have left. Because Dina calls you mother now, and she isn't wrong. Nari's breath shuddered. Every defense she had clung to buckled under the weight of those words. Her eyes stung, but she did not look away. You're not my burden. Lel added, voice firm with finality. You're my family. Both of you are. The words struck her deeper than any vow, sharper than any blade. For so long she had lived unseen, unchosen, surviving on scraps. And now, without ceremony, without condition, she had been claimed, not as charity, as choice. Her hand lifted, trembling, until her fingers brushed the line of his jaw. He didn't move, didn't press closer, only let her choose. She leaned in slowly, their foreheads touching first, breaths mingling in the quiet. Then, at last, their lips met gentle, unhurried, the kind of kiss that spoke of restraint, broken only because trust had been earned. When they parted, Nari rested her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her, steady and grounding, as though it had always been meant to be their dot beyond the walls. Rain Spire's lights pulsed, indifferent and cold. But inside this fragile apartment, warmth spread through the silence like a promise. For the first time since her world had shattered, Nari wasn't surviving. She was living chosen, wanted, and no longer alone.